Good morning slash good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. I just want to start off our webinar by thanking you on behalf of the Pac-Dent and Argon teams for joining today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jimmy Stegall, a respected leader and educator in the dental industry with over 40 years of experience. Jimmy's built an impressive career, including leading a major dental lab, presenting hundreds of training programs on implant and prosthetic restorations, and being recognized as the 2024 NADL Educator of the Year. His expertise and passion for advancing digital dentistry have made a lasting impact on dental practices and labs across North America. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jimmy Stegall.
Thanks, guys. Good. Get the presentation here. Get started. All right. Always love talking about denture workflows. Pretty cool. And it is an exciting time. And what we're going to talk about today is maybe how we transition or the comparison between, I think I just read a survey where maybe 70 some percent is still doing all analog. And 23 to 28% are doing dentures either all digitally or some digitally. So it's trending, it's going up. Everybody's excited about it, and I'm just happy to share my input and my thoughts here. So this is how you get in touch with me. That QR code will take you to my website if you want to reach out to me directly. There's a contact form on there. My cell phone number's on there, so just reach out if you have any questions. All right, I'm going to center this program around the Rodin denture base and Titan. It has become one of my absolute go-tos for printed dentures. And we've had enough development with the material. I'm testing the material now, know that I'm 100% confident in the strength and the aesthetics. And the workflow is what blows me away. And, when we're talking about our time and where we are, and, if you look at the U.S. population and you look at the splitting of the population, I mean, we know that dentures are growing and rapidly, and this is because such a big part of our population percentage-wise is in the denture age, and it's the biggest part of that bubble is really coming up in the next 10 years. So dentures are not going to slow down by any means or fashion at all. And another interesting aspect when I look at the younger generations, also obviously a big part, but these X, Y, and Z's, maybe Y and Z's. Those are the kids that are not afraid to click a mouse, right? And so I think we have a really good resource to help us as we scale, because we know that things are really declining as far as the number of trained dental technicians. We just don't have the schools we used to have. We just aren't making them anymore. So the reality is that the number of denture patients is rapidly increasing due to that population bubble. And, there's going to be plenty of work to go around. The number of dentists, while growing overall, but the number of dentists per population is actually decreasing, which is also a challenge, right, for patients to maybe find an appointment. And I know that there are a lot of dentists that say, well, every time I turn around, there's another dentist opening up down the street. But reality is, the ADA tells us every year how many dentists graduate per 100,000 of the population, and that number is declining. So they can't make them fast enough. And so we have to figure out, how we get them done. And then I just got through reading JDT this month, and, the number keeps going down. We are now at 5,497 dental labs in the U.S. When I started in 79, there were 17, 18,000. And it's, it's a crisis maybe, but I don't, obviously all the cases have to be done by somebody. And so there's outsourcing and offshoring. We know that's had an impact, but a lot of consolidation. There are labs that have closed, but that work has been, taken over by a bigger lab or a lab down the street, whatever. So a number of technicians is only down about 10%, but number of labs down drastically. So what am I getting at with all that? I'm just saying that, look, as lab guys, we have to think about change and, how we do things, because we clearly cannot keep doing it the way we used to do it. When I came up, it was like, look, if you grew, you just went out and hired a few more technicians to do the work. Well, you're trying to find a technician that knows how to set denture teeth in today's world is nearly impossible. again, because we don't have as many schools and the military is not creating as many technicians as they used to. So we just don't have a base to pull from. And training a technician for the denture skills is tough and time consuming. So we have to think about ways to change. And that's where digital comes in. Digital gives us, the options to say, okay, number of patients rapidly increasing, number of dentists increasing a little bit, but number of technicians and labs really dropping. How do we get them all done? And we've got to figure that out. And this wasn't the lab I started in, but it didn't look far from this. And I can remember back even in my mind thinking about black and white days. And today's, things are more modern. We have nicer benches, nicer equipment. We process things differently, right? But ultimately, if we're talking analog dentures, there's not a lot that's changed, right? Lost wax method, drawers of teeth, flasks that are either press packed or injected, an acrylic that shrinks 3 to 6%. And it's just the way of the world. And this is the way I learned it. This is the way a lot of you learned it. And, you know, it works. We know it works. But again, finding the skilled folks that can do these things, that can know what drawer to open and what tooth and how to place that tooth, and the skills in carving the wax up and investing in processing was always a highly appreciated skill in my world. We did 100 dentures a day, and this was an important task. And it, that hasn't changed. Again, 70 some odd percent folks are still doing it this way. And so it's important, that we have trained and skilled people. But if you're going to grow, and you are going to grow, or you have the ability to grow at least because of the demand for dentures, you got to have people that can do these things. And that's where the real challenge, comes into being. And so everybody knows that, I grew up as an analog tech, and but I am a digital denture guy. I really love the aspect that, the fit of that intaglio surface we're looking at in the traditional acrylic world, whether it's injected or not, can never fit 100% the way we need it to fit. But a digital can, if we're doing everything right and using a good material. So, I was the lab's most okayest dental technician. There was no secret about that. And so I became, the sales guy, the chairside support guy, the educator guy. And I was there for 37 years. And we grew, every year. We had great growth. We had great clients. We were just very blessed. And so I tracked everything. Managing the lab allowed me to get into the nuances of what it means to do things and how to make a profit. Right? I said early on through my business degree that nobody wants to go to work to break even. So, Warren Buffett, I was a big fan and read a lot of his stuff. And look, you just got to measure stuff. You got to plan. And then if it doesn't work, you got to change it. And these are the areas that I would look at when we talk about integrating a new technology, a new workflow, a new material. These are all the things that I'm thinking about. How much room, what is the material cost, which is the main question people ask. But you got to think about, the workflow, how you get it through the lab, and then how many you can pull through in a day. But the big one by far is labor, right? Labor time to make something is our biggest expense. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And if we look at our analog workflow, right, and this, I measured everything and counted everything. And it's not that, I would tell our technicians, look, you got to do 40 a day, right? We weren't a production oriented lab, but we needed to know how much. So I would measure, I would watch, I would count, stopwatch, all those things to learn what it would take. And then I worked with manufacturers, other labs, organizations to help me dial in to make sure that we were in line. And I think I've never heard, anybody come and say, look, you're way out of whack here. I think this is pretty normal. I mean, there are some superstar techs that can do things faster, and there are labs that take a lot more time, and that's okay. But you have to know how much time you take, because you got to figure out from that how much you can charge. So, but this was the norm for us. And, again, 100 a day, groups of people, model person, setup person, wax person, vest and process person, finish polish person. Right? So a team of five, and their goal was to do 24 dentures a day. That was their goal, 24 arches. And, it doesn't mean that they had to do it or they were fired. It doesn't mean that they did it every day. I mean, sometimes they did 28, sometimes they did 20. We know in the lab world that every day can be different. Every case can be different. So it's hard to pinpoint this, but I think about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes of hand-on time is about normal for an analog workflow. And so this doesn't count, model setting, processing time, any of that. This is just truly hands-on time. So keep that in mind. We're talking about traditional analog workflow. If you're going to put hands to the job, you're going to need about an hour and a half, hour, 45 minutes of people's skills to do it. And from that, right, okay, what are we paying everybody per hour? It's easy to calculate what it costs you per hour, per minute, per day, per unit, per step, right? So we could analyze this so many different ways to determine where our costs could be improved on. So in a nutshell, we were charging at the time $364 for a standard denture, and that included, a decent line of teeth and everything else involved, including one reset for try-in. So all inclusive, we were kind of a flat fee lab, but we had other levels of dentures. A higher denture would have a different tooth on it, but overall the labor, everything else will be the same. And when we dialed all this in, looking at a gross profit of around $200, that's an okay number. There's nothing wrong with that number, and I would still operate a lab like that today, assuming I could get the people to do this. Right. If I want to go from 24 to 48, I got to go find these 5 more people, right, to get this done. And finding those people is a real challenge. But, if I could, I certainly would be okay with that profit number. I'm exact. And the only thing that doesn't include is taxes, interest, depreciation. So if we summarize all this, right, the number of labs, number of techs going down, lab revenue obviously going down. What we used to charge 360, we may not charge that now. Not so much in the removable world, but in the fixed world, we used to charge $250, $300 for crowns, and now, the common crown price is around 100, 120. People say, well, why did all that happen? Well, there's lots of reasons, and we can complain about them all day long. But the fact is, it's here, and we have to, figure out how to deal with it. And that's when we talk about change. And, people say, why were there 17,000 labs and now there's only 5? And I think some of it is due to people's inability to change, right? I don't have time to learn new technology. I don't have time to get a computer. I'm not good with the computer. If you're not willing to change, there's no way you'll be able to keep up with the world we're in today in the denture world, right? You'll be working, 70 hours a week. So it is a challenge. And so how do we switch, right? How do we go from the way we used to do it to, the way I'm proposing, which is milling or printing our stuff? And, so we milled everything for a long time. We adapted the mill denture when it first came out, the Avident system, and loved it, but it just took too long and it just didn't make any sense. It was more expensive. And I think everybody knew that 3D printing is going to be the way. And this is, everybody knows I came up through Dentsply and I did the Lucitone. And now that I'm independent, right, I look at everything, and I have a Sega printers. I still do some consulting with other people, so I still use other printers. But this is what we're talking about today because this works. Sega printers, Pac-Dent, Rodin, Titan Denture Base 2.0, and Titan Teeth makes a wonderful denture, right? And we'll talk about how I make that denture in a second. But let's look at those costs again, right? If I look at the traditional workflow I just showed you, at $200 a profit a day, and I would, look at it on a daily sales. That's how we'd always measure everything. And so I got 8,700, in retail sales for those 24 dentures, 3,700 in cost, 5,000 in profit. So 57.5% gross profit. Again, anybody can run a good business at that, right? If you can't succeed at that, then you need to rethink where you are. That's a great gross profit. Now let's look at it from a digital perspective, right? If I could wave a magic wand, take the same 5 people, right, and teach them the digital skills in a day, the very next day, this is what we're doing. I take 5 people, and these are the tasks, and these are the time associated with those tasks. We just went from 24 dentures a day to 36 dentures a day. And I think this is a very fair estimate. And that's simply time. It just doesn't take you as long to do the things digitally because technology and software helps us. So I just immediately increased my output. Now I say immediate, we've got to learn the skills, of course, but if I'm making 36 a day instead of 24 a day, I just moved the profit from 209 to 291. So that's pretty good. You look at that percentage, and there's not anybody in this world that wouldn't be thrilled with 80% gross profit in a dental lab. And this is the number that always screams in my mind, Jimmy, if you want to open up a lab again, go open up a digital denture lab. And that's all you do is digital dentures because, give me 4 more people and we'll do 36 dentures a day. And we'll do them in 3 or 4 appointments too, by the way. So the only thing that's not maybe else figured, this is again taxes, interest, depreciation, but also the cost of the printer. And we got to buy equipment, but in a year I could have paid for an Ultra and a Max at $98 a day. So take that $10,496 profit and take 98 a day out of it for the purchase of the printer, and that's just for 12 months, and we're ready to go. So again, love the printers. I have an Ultra and 2 Maxes. They're great for dentures, great for teeth. And people say, oh, the lab that I work in is in the back of my dentist office. They do a lot of digital things in that office. I help them set this up. And so, this is just a quick, when I was first putting the Ultra into the lab, talking about the Ultra and the benefits, but you get a kind of a look around of the things that you'll see, so in the lab, again, those 2 Max printers, the Ultra printer, a couple of curing units, the auto flash is what we're going to use with the Rodin. But I love this technology. Use it for almost everything these days. It's incredible, right? I'm printing Titan for temporary bridges in the Max in 15 minutes. It's pretty exciting. But the nice thing about the Pac-Dent materials is that they are open source, right? It's the number of printers that this stuff's validated in is just, it's almost endless. They're just great at doing that, at looking at lots of technologies and making sure that you can use it. People ask me a lot, okay, I bought the stuff, got the printer, been 6 months, and we're just not doing many. We can't get the doctors to order it, whatever. I'll say it over and over again. Training is absolutely critical, right? You've got people in the lab been doing it a certain way for a long time. And number one, you have to convince them that in order for us to keep up with the demand, we've got to look at digital workflows. And once they've, been committed to that, then, okay, we've got to train them, whatever that looks like, right? You go to the free classes, you go online, you bring somebody like me into the lab and we train people and get them trained up. But the materials are important. We need to have a material that's FDA validated, which these are. We need to have a material that's complete, which in my opinion, this is with the little nuances, but the shades have got to be good. And then, your software creates the part and you just recreate it. So for Titan, right, so they have several options for the denture-based shades, right, including ones that we're familiar with. And, I use the original, I use the lighter pink one, and maybe the ethnic one occasionally. I was using sculpture for the teeth for a while, but I've pretty much dialed into the Titan for teeth. And somebody called me the other day and said, they don't have all 16 Vita shades in Titans. No, they don't. They have the 9 or 10 most popular. But that's where the palette kit comes in. And Pac-Dent did an amazing job with this kit. This is a kit of composite stains that we can use on denture base because there's pinks and purples, but there's also A, B, C, and D shades, and there's yellows and browns and grays and blues. And so we can customize, and it's easy to use. And I love it. I use this quite often, maybe I think what I'm doing here is, turning a monolithic tri-in pink. So whether it's a denture or whether it's a all on next temporary, sometimes we print it out of Titan and we need to add some gingival color. And you can use 2 or 3 different shades of pinks and purples. And I again, I'm the most okayest technician in this, but this kit makes it easy. I love this palette kit. I've used it so many times, but I also use it on the teeth. If I don't have a shade, I'll get, if I have a A1 or A2 shade, but I need an A4, then I've got the browns and the darker colors I can use. And I give Pac-Dent kudos here. When I was at Lab Day West, I saw this thing. I said, this is fantastic. I don't know who put this together, but it's awesome. So the palette manual has a step-by-step guide for every type of modification or customization you might want to do, whether it's crown and bridge temp, all on X, or denture, showing you exactly the tints and colors and where and how to place them. So, for me, it was, oh man, this is a super, paint by numbers instruction how to do it. And the N2F glaze we'll talk about, and they also have a guide for that as well. So scan those codes or reach out to Pac-Dent after this. And so the last thing that I use from Rodin is a relatively new. This just came out. I was just testing it for them the last couple of months. And what I'm showing here in the beginning, right? This is the number one support call I get from folks that I've trained. Dentures came back with these white streaks. What's going on? And it is a misuse, improper use, inadequate use of cleaning denture base with isopropyl alcohol. All instructions have always told us you have to use 99%. But if you use it, if it's dirty, if you use it more than once, if you leave it too long, if you don't let it dry out really well, this is what can happen. And the bad thing is that this doesn't show up for a couple of days, and because it goes down into the surface, and it, over a couple of days, the alcohol molecules evaporate and it leaves behind this residue, and that's not a good thing, right? So we don't like that. Well, back to the universal cleaner. This is a non-isopropyl cleaner. This is a solvent, and it cleans it really well, but it's not IPA. So we don't see the risk of that as much. Because it works just as good when it's dirty. So I love this stuff. I have used it now for denture base. And if right, if we clean the ceramic fill resins like Titan, we're used to dropping stuff in a beaker and putting ultrasonic, right? We're used to immersing our parts to clean them. But with ceramic fill, we haven't been able to do that. The instructions are very clear. You need to take a brush or a paper towel and wipe all the residue off, because if you immerse it, it gets this chalky look to it. Well, that is a huge benefit of this universal resin cleaner. It doesn't do this. So I will take this resin cleaner now, and I think this might be a couple of all on X cases, but full immersion. For the bigger things like this, maybe 2 to 3 minutes in the ultrasonic, and then take it out, check it really well, and, brush off any bits I might see, and it's clean. It's done, right? And so single units, denture base, all on X. I'm really starting to like this stuff a lot. Non-flammable, ship it, store it any way you want to do it. It's a pretty cool solvent. And again, I can use that same jar 4 to 5 to 6 times, and it can be cloudy and dirty, but yet it still works and it doesn't leave that residue. It's a more viscous solvent, but it's a very effective solvent. So this is what I'm using in this process is the Titan, the Denture Base 2, the N2F glaze, and this cleaning material, and then occasionally the palette kit. So let's get into the workflow. So designing a denture, right? This is, a big part of my training is that we teach technicians, how to use the tools available to us to create the dentures so that we can print them. And there's some great tools out there, and both 3Shape and exocad that we can create dentures. And you find the tool you like, right? And the tool that's effective for you. I don't, they both work. So I did get that question a lot. What's your favorite design software? Typically that's been 3Shape. That's what I've used the most and the longest, but I am an exocad user, and it can make a great denture as well. The tools, they're just different. You just learn to use what you use, but we're going to create the design first, and whatever that looks like. And once that is designed, then of course we've got to print them. And once they're printed, then we've got to do the post-processing, I call it, the assembly, the cleaning, all of that. So we've used the Rodin resin cleaner to clean the denture bases and the teeth. And now we're going to sit down at the bench, and we've got to deal with all these little support nibs that are left on the denture base. The T-bars, and I always put T-bars in my denture. The supports on the basal side of the tooth segments. I design most every denture in 3 segments. And so I've got to get all the nibs off the bottom of these segments. This is pretty much the limit of my armamentarium. I use Wagner Aeroflex. in the beginning of printed dentures, I went through about 6, 7, 8 different types of tooling to figure out what's going to be best to smooth these nibs down without running the risk of over finishing, taking away too much, leaving some kind of residue, whatever. And the Aeroflex is great. The Aeroflex is it's a hybrid wheel. I started with rubber wheels of some fashion, and then I went to like the Scotch-Brite type wheels, and they work, but they have their nuances. It's a rubber wheel that's impregnated with Scotch-Brite like material, very durable. I use the black wheel for denture base, and the red, the super fine for the underside or the tooth segments. I use the micro wire cutters to take the T-bars off. And then I keep a jar of IPA or the resin cleaner clean on the bench while I'm doing this. And I'm going to use that and a toothbrush to clean the dust off as I'm finishing this or once I finish this down. So let's look at what that looks like. Now, T-bars are, in my opinion, critical for denture accuracy and success. So not every workflow I've ever learned requires it, but I have found that I just have a whole lot fewer problems if I use them. So this is my normal T-bar assembly you see here, and that's done in 3-shape. It can be done in mesh mixer, but in most cases, we leave those T-bars on until after the dentures are cured. Well, benefit one of the Pac-Dent Rodin denture material is that it cures in the auto flash with what I think is a minimal number of flashes. So the heat generated never gets to a point that I worry about distortion during curing. A lot of the other resins generate a lot more heat. There's some that are cured at 80 to 100 degrees Celsius, and that absolutely will soften this material while it's curing, but we don't get that hot. So I am now cutting off the T-bars in this step. This is green state. This is printed and cleaned only. And so I'm going to remove these T-bars. I'm going to smooth those spots down, and then I'm going to take that wheel and I'm going to get everything nice and smooth, whether, if there's print lines I don't like, or if I didn't get a design just perfect, which I try to do so I don't have to do any festooning, but I can do that here as well. But remember, it's a green state. So the key here with these Aeroflex wheels and this printed material is low speed, 10,000 RPMs max, 8 to 10 is all I go, and a very light touch. You don't want to ever put any heavy pressure on this because it is a heat sensitive material. It's a polymer, and heat could distort it or create a mark we couldn't get rid of. So, I'm going to sit at the bench. I'm going to get those T-bars off, and I'm going to use that Aeroflex fine. You can use the red one, but the black one is a little, it doesn't wear out as fast if you use the black one. And here I am, I didn't change my wheel using the red one, but I'm just smoothing those spots down. And this takes me 2 or 3 minutes at most. I orient all my dentures on the printer, heel to platform and angle to the lingual, so that all my supports are on the border only. So I don't have any supports on the facial side of the denture anywhere. So all I need to worry about is the T-bar supports, and then you can see the little nibs around the edge of the border. And so it's a quick 2 or 3 minute process to get this smoothed out. Obviously, that's creating a lot of dust, and so that's where the alcohol comes in. So again, I'm using the black wheel to remove those nibs along the border, and it takes just a couple of passes. Then I'm going to take a toothbrush, dip it in the IPA or the Rodin resin cleaner, and just scrub it a little bit just to get all that dust off and dry it really well to make sure I've got it good and clean. And you want to make sure all your parts are completely dry before you start tacking teeth or placing teeth or using bonding resin. If they have any moisture, whether it's from a solvent or water, that can cause a staining problem or a white bleaching look to the dentures as well. So I'm going to clean the dust off. I'm going to dry it well. And that's what I'm looking at. So I went, from nibs, smoothing, cleaning. And, once I've done that, then I got to jump over to the teeth. So you can see the nibs around the periphery of my tooth segment. And you see me using a buff wheel, or the Wagner wheel is my favorite because the buff wheel just can't get everywhere. The buff wheel I will typically use if I happen to come across a segment where the supports are on the occlusal. I know some people have a preference of putting them on the occlusal. I always prefer the basal. I think the occlusion is more consistent when you do that, but that's just a preference thing. But I'm going to get these nibs smoothed off. Takes a couple of minutes to do this as well, and it's just a couple of passes. It's a very small nib. My supports are 0.3 or 0.4, 0.5 at the most, depending on the size of the part, and it just doesn't take much to take these things off. And so I'm doing a couple of minutes on the teeth, a couple of minutes on the base, and I'm ready to assemble.
So, so, so
Now here's where the big win comes in. In everybody else's system, if it's time to bond that tooth segment, we're getting either a special bonding resin that matches the base, or we're actually using the base material itself, pink. And so we put a little of the pink stuff in the pockets, we seat the segment, and we start wiping all the excess off. Well, as you can imagine, the pink stuff gets on the teeth and gets, in the gingival groove and in the embrasures, and we have to make sure we clean that off well. Well, I give Pac-Dent a lot of kudos for this, because developing this glaze, this N2F glaze, to be not only a glaze, which I use it for, but also the bonding resin for denture teeth. And guys, it doesn't get any simpler than this. I put a couple of drops of this into the tooth pocket, seat the segment into the pocket, and then that glaze, wipe the excess away. But you really don't wipe it away, because I like to use the glaze. I don't like to go to a pumice bench. Everybody knows me. I hate the pumice bench. I'm not good at it. Well, I love these glazes. You see what I'm doing? The glaze is just covering the gingiva and the teeth. And I'm going around that gingival margin carefully to make sure I don't puddle the glaze. But I just bonded that segment and glazed that part of the denture in what, 20 seconds? This rapidly improved the time. If I'm using a pink material, right, which means I'm using pink to put the segments in, then I'm coming back, put the glaze on after that, maybe 7 to 9 minutes of denture. This is maybe 3 to 5 minutes. It is that easy, right? And these guys did a lot of work on this. The bond strength's amazing, but what we really win from this is the workflow time. I mean, this makes this workflow by far the fastest workflow out there. Now, I do take time to make sure I clean off the puddling, and I want to make sure that it looks natural. But I love this material. Love it because it just makes the workflow so easy to get through the process of putting the two segments in. Remember, the denture's not cured, right? We're painting, or we're using this to put the teeth in, and we're just tacking them down, tacking the glaze on. This glaze is going into the surface of the denture base and the teeth 10 or 15 microns, because those materials aren't cured yet. They're out of the printer. They've been cleaned. I've smoothed them, washed them, but they're still microporous, right? Until they're cured in the curing oven, all the molecules aren't locked up. So there's microporosities that this glaze goes into. This is unlike any glaze we've ever used on any resin before. All other glazes out there are painted on before or after everything's cured. Every denture glaze we always use, and they're great. There's nothing wrong with them, but you put them on after the dentures are processed. That makes it a surface glaze. It's not soaking into anything. And that's why we see peeling and cracking, discoloring, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it lasts. This one goes in about 10 or 15 microns. Right, this is not going to wear out near as fast. Right, it doesn't take much to take a wheel and cut 10 microns off. I get that, but this one is great in that we're soaking in. So when we put this in the curing unit, we're locking that glaze into that 10 micron depth, and it's just not going to come off that easy. So I use the auto flash. After I get this glaze, spread out over the teeth, over the gingiva. The teeth are tacked in. I've taken the T-bars off, so I've got it on the palate. This denture is done. I just got to cure it. So it goes in there at 4,500. I do flip it over halfway through. So when it comes out, it's absolutely finished, right? You've seen the pictures. They're shiny. They look good, and we're done with them. And the question about relines and repairs, all the time. The nice thing about these polymers is, yeah, you can repair them with cold cure acrylic if you have to have, a fracture repair. But honestly, my opinion has always been, find out where it broke, go back to the design, fix that area, and print another one. To me that would cost me less than the repair time, but it is repairable. Now for soft liner, there are limited number of soft liners on the market that adhere to the polymers, but and Pac didn't realize this, so they developed this kit, which I absolutely love as well. The soft reline kit comes with everything you need to make a pretty simple soft liner, either on a model or chair side. Now, it has some specific steps that you have to follow. I've had some people call me and say, this stuff peeled out pretty easily. Well, you've got to do number 2 step really well. You've got to take that Scotch-Brite wheel and make sure that you get a good Scotch-Brited surface on the intaglio of your denture. So it needs that. The second most important step is making sure that the primer is applied evenly and you allow it to dry. So paint it on, good moderate coat, let it air dry, and then we put the soft liner in and leave it in the mouth for about 5 minutes or on the model. And then it just, you have to cut it out. It's just not going to come out. I've given this to my dentist, and he's used it now on a couple of patients, and he says it's one of the best he's seen so far. So other things we might be doing with the Denture Base 2.0 is that obviously if I said that this printed resin was stronger than any acrylic we've used, and it is, it's about 2 to 3 times stronger than regular methyl methacrylate acrylic. Why do we not want to design our flippers, our study plates out of this and then print them? And so I do that. Labs do that all the time. If you're doing an acrylic type partial out of a printed resin and you want to add a wire clasp, now the question I get is that you want to bend your wire on the model before you scan the model, and then scan the model with the wire on the model, and then design your partial over that. And that's going to create a little groove on the intaglio, and then you just pick it up with a little more resin or with some cold cure or a pickup material. This is not a flexible partial. This is a traditional acrylic type partial. Flexible partials, topic for another day, but they are here. A couple of versions, more coming. Copy dentures. Yes, obviously we're doing copy dentures out of the Rodin material. Copy dentures is just a workflow, but it's just like all the other dentures that we do, and they work great. But, again, helping our business, we've got to coach our docs up. I tell labs all the time, do not go out there and ask your dentist, hey, you want to buy one of these digital dentures? You want to go out there and ask your dentist, hey, you want to start doing dentures in 2 or 3 or 4 appointments? Again, if I go up and open up a lab, I'm guaranteeing it. Guys, we will do dentures in 4 appointments or less. I absolutely guarantee it. Now, there's things I've got to teach you, right? Scanning, impression washes, all the things that we've got to learn clinically, right? But we absolutely can do this in 4 appointments or less. Implants. Yeah, if I just said that this Rodin denture base was 2 times stronger than traditional acrylic, why would I not want to do all my locators, my conus cases, desk lock, anything in an overdenture that I can use a denture base is twice as strong? Why would I not want to do that? So I do that quite often. And then implant conversions. Yeah, Titan is my go-to for this, right? It's what a lot of folks are using. A printed prototype for an implant case, an all-on-X case is just pretty much the standard today. The designs are easy, the printing is fast, and the material is super strong. So love doing this. This is my go-to workflow for an all-on-X. This was a case I did with Dr. Koch where it was a lower locator denture and an upper all-on-X case, and this was a prototyping appointment. So we designed everything and then put some cylinders in it and let the patient get dialed in on occlusion, adjust it, whatever adjustments the patient might want after that. We figure all that out in the prototypes, but I'm using Titan for that almost all the time now. So that's our workflow. And again, when you go to the dentist and say, hey, let's talk about digital dentures, this is the approach. The approach is not about, oh, it's a cool digital denture. The approach is, I know you don't like the 8 appointments it's been taken. So I know you don't like bite rims. It's hard. I know you don't like custom trays and border molding impressions. They're hard. They really are. and I know you don't like adjustments after delivery. And what happens if they lose it? Right? Starting over is always an anxiety driven thing. So we go out and we coach up the workflows. I've done hundreds of clinical lectures in the last few years to dental groups, showing them how to do this. Look, guys, this is all it takes. And dentists will all come up to me afterwards and said, wait, you're telling me that all I have to do is do a wash impression in the patient's old denture, take it out of the mouth and scan it and send that to my lab, and I can, get a prototype. Maybe it's pink, maybe it's white. And then, if the bite's off, take a new bite and send that scan back to the lab, and then I can deliver on the third appointment. I would guarantee it, doc, or it's free. That's how easy this works. It is a wonderful workflow, and it makes your world better. So for dentists, this is changing their lives. You ask any dentist what's their favorite thing about doing dentures, and they're going to tell you nothing. And but this, that I've got prosthodontists that are doing this now, and I never believed prosthodontists would adapt this, but they absolutely love doing this because it really simplifies it. And the question always comes up, what if they don't have dentures? Well, we do some things in the analog world, and there's some newer things, with thermoplastic denture trays that look like dentures. And this is a lot of cool tools out there that we can teach our dentists on how to do this. And again, in 4 appointments less. I don't care if the patient doesn't have a denture. I'm still doing it in 4 or fewer appointments. And immediates, I tell dentists all the time, if you have an intraoral scanner, you should never put goop in the mouth again for those cases. You should scan the upper, scan the lower, scan the bite, send that to the lab, and ask them for a digital workflow. If you're a dental lab and you have a pan with 2 models for an immediate case, do not cut the teeth off those stone models. Scan the models as they are and run through the immediate denture workflow in the software where you're going to virtually extract the teeth. Your setups are going to be way better, and you're going to have a lot more predictability, a lot more success. So that's the material. That's the workflow. I don't use all of this stuff because I'm not an everyday lab, but I have used almost all of it. And I've been able to test some of their newer things. And I get excited every time they send me something because they hit pretty much a home run every time they do it. But I can tell you that most of the bottles I open is denture base and Titan, and maybe the model material, surgical guide, and then some newer stuff I've been testing that I'm pretty excited about. That was the N2F glaze. That's like liquid gold to me. That is my Mike's Red Hot, right? I put it on everything. It is really great for printed resin. So, you get this stuff from all the major vendors, and just reach out to Pac-Dent. Now, if you scan this QR code, I've created a handout folder for you that goes through these workflows. It has some more information. Some of the Rodin handouts are in that folder, but scan this QR code, fill out the form, and you'll be given access to a folder on my Google Drive that has these resources in it for you. So I wanted to leave at least 10 minutes or so for questions. And so we'll ask the Oregon, our Pac-Dent guys, if they want to bring that up.
Okay. Hi, Jimmy. Attendees, please put any questions you might have in the chat for Jimmy. Jimmy, the first one that we got says, how does the Rodin material compare to Lucitone printed material in terms of cured strength and per unit cost?
Yeah, one of my first questions, obviously, my background, where I came from, Lucitone digital print, FDA validated to be, 2,000 to 3,000 joules per meter squared anti-fracture toughness. So Pac-Dent did their due diligence, sent their resins to Dr. Giordano, is that how you say it?
Yeah,
to
Dr.
do their test, and sent me the results of the test. And guys, it's the same. It's the same exact strength, if not a little higher than the Lucitone digital print. So, I always told the folks at Dentsply there'll be others that's going to match you, and Pac-Dent has done it. It is every bit as strong as the LDP.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Jimmy? Feel free to put them in the chat. Jimmy, if you have a finished and glazed denture and you need to make adjustments, does it need to be cured again?
So that's a great question, and it brings up a very good point, right? So if it's finished and glazed and the doctor says, I don't like your festooning at all, your root eminences are too whatever, so I'm gonna smooth them down, and okay, now it's not shiny anymore. And so if you can choose to put glaze back on it, but remember the denture is fully cured at this point. So if I put the glaze back on it at this point, then I want to buff it up with a wheel first, a Scotch Brite wheel or a Wagner wheel, to help the glaze stick better, but it's not going to soak in, right? Because it's fully cured. So it's not as ideal as in the normal step. And the option would be you can also polish it. Traditional polishing materials and techniques, get to that pumice bench, right? And pumice it and then high shine it with a high shine. It absolutely works. You can go either way, but we just have to be aware that if I'm going to put the glaze back on it, I'm not getting the full benefit that I got in the beginning. And not a negative, it's just you got to know that, so that if it peels and cracks, that you'll know why. So, so, so,
Okay. And
so
then regarding polishing, another attendee had a question. Do you polish before applying the glaze? And they said when they do it, it leaves microparticles.
no, I don't polish at all. The only thing I do is use those Wagner wheels to remove the supports. I very rarely have to do anything on the facial surface of the denture, but if I missed a festoon or a cervical roll, I may define that more, but I try to avoid that. And so, no, I don't do any, polishing ahead of time. It's not like zirconia. It's, the glaze is going to fill in those nuances without, worrying about leaving particles. So,
Okay. And then another one is, so a clinic has a question. They said they have heavy loads of denture cases, lots of midlife fractured dentures, 3 to 4 months after delivery. Do you have any suggestions for them?
that's always been a very common issue with maxillary dentures. In traditional world, 30 years ago, we had that problem then as well, especially if you were doing a maxillary denture opposing natural dentition. Right? We're asking a methyl methacrylate to withstand natural forces of occlusion is tough, but a full over full, you don't see it as much, but occasionally can happen. With printed or milled dentures, it still can happen occasionally if you aren't super careful in your design with your thicknesses, um, in, under, around your centrals. And so one of the last things I do when I'm finishing a design is go use a 2D cross section tool and look and see, how much thickness do I have under those two centrals, in between those two centrals, on the pocket area, because it can get thin there based on the parameters you're giving the software on how thick and thin and deep you want your pockets and all that stuff. And I have seen some fractures even with the printed dentures from that, even though it's so strong. And it's simply just a hiccup or a bug in the design software. You tell it, I don't want the minimum thickness under pocket to be any less than this, but that number's pretty small. And if that happens right between the two centrals, it can propagate a small fracture, which would make that denture break. So thicken it up in that area, and you'll be okay. So, so, so
Okay. Another question is, since you're using the glaze N2 free, do you still cure in the nitrogen? Do you still cure nitrogen in the auto flash?
100%, a full cure, full nitrogen the whole time. And a lot of that comes from uh, working with the R&D engineers in multiple companies, and all these resin chemical engineers. They all said it in one form or fashion that all resins cure better in an oxygen-free environment. Now, some resins are designed to cure completely in an oxygen environment, but even those, I've been told, cure better in a nitrogen environment. So yes, I always use nitrogen 100% of the time. So, 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 so,
Okay. Thank you, Jimmy. Does anyone have any final questions for Jimmy before we wrap up the webinar today?
so, so, so,
Uh,
so
do you have a minimum required thickness for your denture designs, Jimmy?
I do. I try to get all my maxillaries at 2.5 millimeters and my mandibulars at 3.5. That is not always possible. There are times when you have to make them thinner, but that's my goal. That's my target. When I can do that, I've never had any problems. Right. And say for locator cases, if I want to do a desk lock or locator case on a lower, if I can get 3.5 millimeters of thickness around the housing, I don't even put a strengthener in it. But if I have to make it thinner because of space, then I'm going to figure out a way to get a strengthener in that denture.
So, okay, thank you. Looks like we have another question. Is there anything that can help with staining? This person has noticed some bad staining after a while using with the glaze. Do you have any tips for them?
Well, the only dentures that I see staining, like coffee stains, or tobacco stains, right, like that, if that's what you're talking about, is because it wasn't glazed properly. One of the things you have to be aware of with the glazes is that as you're painting it on the surface of the tooth or the gingiva, that it is a volatile chemical, meaning it evaporates. And if you're painting it on an area and then you go to the next area and the next area without taking a little tack light, a little small UV light, and setting that glaze, it's going to
So,
evaporate. And so if you just like paint the whole denture without setting it and then get to the curing unit, maybe 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes after you do it, if you got multiple dentures, even longer, a good portion of that glaze is evaporated out of the pores off the surface, and then that area is going to stain quicker. So I always make sure that I set my glaze using a little tack light. And it doesn't take a bright UV. You don't want a high volume UV. Um, Matter of fact, if I'm doing a bunch, I'll use a little Asiga box because it's just a low UV and it's got a drawer and I can get 4 dentures at a time in there. And I'll paint an area of a denture and I'll stick it in there and close the drawer and paint another area of another denture and then kind of leapfrog them back and forth until I get the whole, all quadrants of the denture painted. But yeah, you got to set that glaze. If you don't, it's going to stain. So uh, I haven't seen any staining of dentures if the glaze is done properly. And there were a lot of tests done. Part of FDA validations. These guys that test all this stuff for us, they'll glaze it and put it in triple strength coffee for 2 weeks and pull it out. And I've seen some dentures that I would think are going to be black, but they aren't. So I know that it can, be pretty free of stain.
so, so, okay. Looks like we have a couple more. Do you recommend curing denture bases after printing? This person does a slight cure after print and alcohol bath, and if they don't do it, it becomes slightly tacky. Have you found any way to avoid that?
No, I don't. I absolutely don't do any curing until after I get the teeth tacked in and the glaze point painted on. Because if you do any curing whatsoever, you're already binding up the molecules. And if you bind up a molecule, that means that's fewer molecules for your bond to stick to, right? And I want the best bond strength. I don't want teeth to come out, right? And so, no, I don't do any curing. That some of the problems that I've helped with in the past is due to that. People have cured this part, and then glued them together. So, I get the tackiness, and with the Rodin, that doesn't seem to be an issue, especially with the resin cleaner, the new one. They come out very, you saw the surface of that thing. It was very dry. It wasn't tacky at all. And as I'm smoothing the nibs down, it's not creating a gummy, tacky surface. It's creating a dust. So, it's the printer gets them, whatever, 85 to 88% done. So it shouldn't be tacky. And I just want to see dust. If I don't see dust, I'm worried about my printer.
So, so, okay. Looks like there's two questions here that I can help Jimmy answer. So the first one is regarding the non-IPA cleaner being available. So the Rodin Universal Resin Cleaner is actually available now. So you can feel free to go ahead and reach out to your local rep to get that product, from your distributor. And second question, do you know of anywhere, have any contacts to get sample resins? And there will be a follow-up email to this webinar with a link to our Glaze N2 free sample page that Jimmy had the QR code for earlier in the presentation. And so that'll allow you to have a unit dose to try out our nitrogen-free glaze. So stay tuned for that. Any final questions for Jimmy before we wrap this up? So, 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 so,
Somebody wants some sample Titan, Bubby.
Okay, I think that will be all for our webinar today. A big thank you to Jimmy Stegall for hosting this webinar, and I hope that the attendees were able to take away some great information from Jimmy's webinar.
Love it, guys. It's I think I can actually make a Rodin denture base too with Titan teeth denture. hands-on time, total hands-on time. If you remember the screen, it was hour and a half, hour and 45 for analog, maybe 55 minutes for digital. That was my number for a long time, but I need to go back and do, if it's just the Pac-Dent, I think it's 40 or 45 minutes. I mean, and how many more dentures a day could somebody do if I just save myself another 10 minutes? So it's a pretty efficient workflow, and it's that N2F glaze and the 4,500 cycles, and the auto flash is what, Andrew, 7 minutes at most, 6 or 7 minutes. So I'm curing 2 to 4 dentures in 6 to 7 minutes, and I don't have anything to do afterwards. T-bar's already done. It's just they're out the door. It's fantastic, fantastic.
So, so, so,
Serena, you call me. I'll send you a sample of Titan. I have some small bottles. I think I can send you some.
Okay, well, without any further ado, thank you guys again for attending our webinar today. Stay tuned for that follow-up email from Pac-Dent and Argon with, some exciting information about the products. And, feel free to reach out to Jimmy if you have any other questions as well. Okay, thank you
Thank
all.
you
Hope
for
you have-
Argon and Pac-Dent for having me. It's always a pleasure. Love working with you guys.
Okay, thank you all. Everyone, have a good day.